Jose, as a final comment, you spent 23 years in San Jose, both at the university and in the community, involved in many, many activities. What are 3 of the accomplishments you're most proud of?
Well, I think number 1 has to do with helping to solve a very serious community issue. While I was executive director of MACSA, and that was the Trevino, what we refer to as the Trevino affair.
Tell us a little bit about what happened.
Well, Trevino was a guy that was killed by 2 policemen when he was in a car. He was drunk and he had his girlfriend, and he was slumped over the wheel. And when one of the police cars stopped behind him, one in front of him, the mother of the lady he was with had called the police to say that he was being abusive to her and he was drunk and he was afraid he might harm her. And so when they came, they were ready, loaded for bear. They blocked him, and then one stood on the passenger side, one on the driver's side with their guns drawn. And Trevino was slumped over the thing, and then the lady started exiting from the car, and he came up trying to reach for her. And they say that they thought he had a gun, and they shot him and killed him. Well, that got the community really very angry, very excited, because in the 7 years' time, there had been 15 police homicides, 8 of which were Chicano, 6 were black, and 1 was a young hippie that was high on drugs and with an empty air pistol. But Trevino was a guy that the community said, enough's enough. And MACSA had this program of trying to document police that were using harsh methods, or they were being brutal to Chicanos, especially out on this side. That's before my time there, but there had already been an effort to look at what the police were doing to the Chicano community. And brutality of police toward Chicanos was one. And there had been the Shargan affair before my time, which was a judge saying that maybe Hitler was right, that animals should be shot and that Chicanos were behaving like animals. So between those 2 things, the community was really uptight, because one of the police homicides was a polio victim that couldn't hardly walk very well, but he was shot in the back because the cop claimed that he was trying to run away, to escape. And there were other very egregious kind of things that happened that shouldn't have happened. So the community was ready to start burning down the city, Molotov cocktails or whatever, City Hall. So I was asked actually by Jackie Barra, who was then, I think, in charge of the Confederación de las Naciones Unidas. Why he came to me, I don't know, but he came and he said, Jose, we have this serious problem. The Confederación is in no position to do much about it except get the people out, but they have to be directed. We know about your track record in organizing some things, and we would like you to go and organize a community about this police killing. So that's what I did. And without going into a lot of details, I'll just like to say that it was settled on a nonviolent basis. We had to work very hard to keep it nonviolent, because there were people from Berkeley, from Oakland, other areas that came in saying, let's kill a cop that killed Danny Trevino. And I said, stop that shit, And if you don't have to worry about cops. We'll come and get you. And I had 18 brown berets surrounding the table where they were sitting. So we had to take steps like those to resolve the matter. The other was the firing of the chief of police that everybody was calling for. But the city manager let me know on a personal basis that no self-respecting manager ever succumbs to public pressure about who to hire or fire. Hi, how are you?
Fine.
Good. And so when, instead of hollering for the firing of the chief of police, the next time we went up before the city council, we had a guy with a loud voice say, fire the city manager. So that gave him the room to fire the chief of police. It was a very serious, extremely serious matter. I learned how to handle some of that because I had been in the grand jury and learned about how the grand jury handled police killings. And so I knew how the system worked from that end of things. but I knew also how the people felt about being killed and being mistreated by the police. So we resolved that by making a series of demands, some of which we wanted more minorities hired into the police department at all levels. There were no women or minorities in the internal affairs unit. There were no women or minorities in the quick response teams they had. In other words, women and minorities were excluded from key areas in the police department that we said we want those doors open. We got it. We wanted policies that established the fact that lethal force could not be used in certain cases. So that was a major policy change. We had people, they agreed to hire more Chicanos, Chicanas at all levels of the police department. The police chief was fired eventually, and then Joe McNamara was hired, and he came from New York, and Joe was the guy that said there had to be more community police relations built up, put the cops out on walk the streets, not just walk right around in cars. So, and then the new chief of police brought in new ways of saying he agreed to training programs for the police that would be sensitive to the community, and he agreed to bring in Chicano trainers and speakers for their training. So there were a number of things that happened, and I can't remember all the details except that.
So that was one of your big accomplishments.
That was one of the.
What's another?
My biggest accomplishment. Well, the second had to do with making sure that the MAGS program, Mexican American Graduate Studies, and that the School of Social Work were not only well represented and were given the resources to forge ahead, but that were provided the resources especially to look at how can we prepare the product, whether it be a graduate student or an undergraduate student from MAGS or from the School of Social Work, that was well trained, that the product was ready to go out there and serve the community. So one of the things we had as part of the School of Social Work curriculum was that every student, regardless of whether they were Chicano or not, and 80% of our students were not Chicano. They were mostly Anglo women. And then we started getting some minorities, but we required that they have conversational ability in Spanish. So between the summer session, the academic first year and the second year of graduate study, students had to go to Mexico and live with a Mexican family and pick up at least the ability to carry on a conversation or understand. So that was part of an overall effort to revive, I think, in a curricular way, in an academic way, a responsibility to better prepare the product of San Jose State to relate to the needs of the Chicano community. Field placements had a lot to do with it. But I think that the role I played both in MAGS and in the School of Social Work was what I think I'm proud of. The third thing that I feel I gained from personally was my relationship with Dr. Galarza. And maybe that should be first, because he was my mentor in how to look critically at serious problems or issues from an academic standpoint or from a community standpoint.
Before you go further, tell us who Ernesto Galarza was.
Well, Ernesto Galarza was considered in our day, at that time, the preeminent Chicano scholar that wrote many books and documented many things that happened with farm workers especially, but also that happened with safety issues like the tragedy at Chular, which was about a bus full of Mexicans that got run over by a train and killed 32 people, I think. So he used his ability to write. He was a scholarly kind that researched everything thoroughly. And I learned from him how important it was to document things. He taught me that if you have a serious problem, either in the academic setting or the non-academic setting, that if you write a memo to yourself, that represents legal evidence about what you did or didn't do or understood or didn't understand about any issue, any serious issue. So that was one of the little things that he taught me. He taught me how important it was to communicate and keep people informed. During the Trevino Affair, for instance, he said, well, don't you think it would be helpful if you would report to the community at the community meetings? And I said, well, we do that. He says, yeah, but do it in writing. Do it in Spanish too. So I developed, when we met at Guadalupe Church, I developed my weekly reports to the community in English and Spanish, 2 columns. So I learned things like that from him, how to communicate, how to share information, and his end expectation was educating the community about what needed the community's attention in an ordered way, in a logical way, in a way that made sense to them. So that was very important also for our teaching at MAGS or at the School of Social Work. How do you communicate with people in need? How do you communicate with bureaucrats that are responsible for credentialing you or for deciding funding sources or whatever? So he was an invaluable resource to me. And like I said, this probably should be number 1 because I always had him I could go to privately, cry on his shoulder, whatever. I know that I was with a group of Chicanos there one time. I was so tired from my going night and day on some of these issues that I fell asleep in that meeting. And when some of the people that were there said, wake Jose up, and Galarza said, don't, leave him alone. He said, he needs that rest. And all of us need rest sometimes. And surcease from the vicissitudes that face that sort of thing. He was a very articulate person, both in English and Spanish. And he taught me the value of how to communicate and again share information. So that, the Trevino Affair, the School of Social Work, and then of course there was the whole effort at the Bilingual Studio Laboratory that I've discussed already. Those were the important things that happened.
What are the challenges that you wish you would have had more answers to during your time here that are going to be the challenges for the next generation of leaders?
Well, here again, it's to learn. We need more Chicanos, if you will. We need more top administrators. We need policymakers, legislative people, elected officials. We need people in key positions and mid-management positions. So one thing that I feel that we were reacting to the times. We were reacting to the pressures that were facing us. But had I stopped to think maybe more critically, we needed more community educational programming, for instance, where we found better ways of educating the community, not only about their rights and privileges, but about their responsibilities. An educational program that is empowering to community groups. And we need that across the spectrum, whether it's in the academic setting or in the social services or health services setting or educational setting. We need more, we needed more Joe Cottos type of people that could use their position to bring other key leaders in the community together to look at what kind of approach, what kind of planning do we need, and what kind of resources do we need to meet not only the educational needs of children and youth, but the educational needs of parents. We need literacy programs for parents. We need students to know that now in the electronics age or in the emerging computer age, that they were learning those things in school, but that they had to share them with their parents. So we needed programs to develop where we would use the latest technology and use the students that were learning them to know how to share them with their parents, for instance. That kind of educational program, and we need how to use the other thing we didn't use effectively enough, and we didn't know how to hold the church accountable, for instance. Most of the people were Catholic, but there are two very powerful instruments the church has, aside from churches and gyms and things, and that's the pulpit, and that's the Sunday bulletin. We didn't use those two things effectively enough. I don't know that we used them effectively at all, but that's something that needs attention in terms of where do you turn to where the people congregate? And how do you reach them? How do you go to them? How do you educate them? Well, the church has the pulpit and the church bulletin and other resources. So we need to look at how do we use resources that the people are used to already that should be more effectively organized to respond to their needs, both spiritual and temporal. So that's an area that needed attention then. I think it needs attention now, quite frankly. And not only the Catholic Church, but where a lot of our people are found, in Protestant churches or even in pubs or wherever they hang out. We need to know how to penetrate those resources and make them work for the people to raise up their not only expectations, but their well-being, both spiritual and temporal. What else do we need? Well, what else would I do differently? I think just understanding how you build relationships. A lot of what I did was because I knew how to communicate with and share information with power establishment types. An example of that is that when that proposition came out, Proposition H, I think it was called, to bring water from the reservoir across the mountains into San Jose, I joined in trying to make that happen when the Sierra Club was against. And Jack Brito was with the Sierra Club and I was with the PG&E types. And why was I there? Because I knew that Chino Vasquez came to me and said, our little farms out in Gilroy and Morgan Hill are drying up because they had shallow surface wells and they didn't have water to irrigate. So we needed more waters to replenish the aquifers, for one thing. And I told the people that were pushing Proposition H, I said, if you don't get the Chicano vote, this thing's going to fail. And Howard Campen and his brother, I think Howard was county manager at the time, I said to him, we need publicity, we need advertising, we need a lot of things geared to the Chicano community. You need that vote. And I said, no, we don't need it. He says, I'm telling you, you do. And I had enough respect in the community because I settled a very serious issue of Trevino in a peaceful manner that they listened to me. So Howard though said, well, let's bet $100. I'll bet $100 that I'll give to your favorite charity or you do to me that the margin of victory that I know we'll get will be more than 10%. And I said, and I'll bet you that it's going to be less than 5%. It turned out to be 3%. So I had him donate $100 to my favorite charity, MACSA. And it was things like that. Where do you find people betting on the outcome of a very serious water issue? And I had participated in some water issues that they say, well, Jose, you were right, and we better pay more attention to the value that the Chicano vote has. So that was, I think, a valuable thing that needs attention still. We know that now, given the reactionary kind of position that Republican governors are having in not promoting the vote, but in cutting back the vote, especially of minorities, and that includes Chicanos. So there are a number of other things that I could say, but suffice it to say that my experience, my personal experience, that I grew a lot from being in San Jose. My personal attitude is that if I am to be a good Christian, the best way to be a good Christian is to serve the community well, to serve families well, to serve the community well. That was my expectation of our students. Serve the community well in whatever position you have. I don't care if you're a lawyer, engineer, an executive in an important startup company or whatever. Does this serve the community well? And I think that's a very important thing for all of us that are educated, that have resources, and that can help the communities, that we have a moral obligation to be there for the community.